so often in the conservative Christian community, and I would say we also see this in the progressive Christian community. We feel a need to only present our side of the story or to not ask unsafe questions because we're afraid, right? We're afraid. We don't want our kids to learn about sexuality from public schools. We don't want, there's just long lists of these things. And for me, I got to know who the real God was through my unsafe questions. And I think if we're going to be a people who believe that God is truth and God has truth, we have to be willing to engage with difficult questions and difficult subjects.
Hello and welcome to The Naked Gospel, where we have conversations about sex, singleness, marriage, pornography, and everything in between. We bring on cultural thinkers, parents, important folk, and normal folk alike. I am your host, Shane O'Neill. If you're listening in, video versions of all of these episodes are available at YouTube, Proven Ministries. We have that below. If you're watching, you just rather listen in, then all of these episodes are available on every major podcast platform. Whether you're listening or watching, do subscribe and continue to track with us. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy the episode. Before we jump into the episode, let me introduce you to a new initiative we put together called the Disruptors Initiative for podcast listeners and viewers like you. So the Disruptors Initiative is framed after our rebellious king because we do want to disrupt with him the culture that we see around him. For $5 a month, you get to directly support this show, which informs who we have on, the questions we ask them, the newsletters we send out, as well as receive really sweet swag like this coffee mug, this Naked Gospel coffee mug, different shirts that we design and put out, and a whole load of other things. So check the link below, track with us, disrupt with us, and partner alongside of us. So Brenna Blain is joining us today, and she is a mother of two. She and her husband co-host a podcast, which she will be telling us about. She's had a very, I would say, remarkable story, but then I think maybe all stories are remarkable in their own way, but her trek with Jesus has given me life recently, and I'm excited to hear it afresh and hear it with you guys. So thank you for joining us. If you found this podcast helpful, please share it with somebody that you think would benefit from it. Brenna, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So before we start moving backwards, would you mind just painting a picture of what your life looks like right now?
Yeah, so my biggest current job is that I'm raising my 2.5-year-old, and then we have another on the way coming in August. So I have Rudy, who is he's never sat still in his life, and so I feel like this full-time stay-at-home mom thing is like way more exhausting than I ever pictured it to be. And then I also am a Christian speaker, and so I do that. I call it my evening and weekend job. And I just get to hang out with different churches and ministries and people and talk about and teach about who God is and what the Bible says about him. I'm married to my best friend, Austin. And I mean, a lot of people are always like, of course you married your best friend, but we have a little bit of a different story, which you'll hear kind of today and why I use that term best friend. But we live in the Pacific Northwest. I graduated from Multnomah University back in 2020, which seems like a really long time ago, but it has not been that long considering what's happened this year. So
it's been a heck of a year, a heck of the last, for sure, a year. Because I think COVID hit a year ago. And then the riots over the summer and then the presidential election. It has been a heck of a year. So I hear you on all of that. I was curious. I don't actually know if this is an inappropriate question to ask. I have 3 sisters, so I really don't know if it's inappropriate or not. But I've noticed that some of my sisters, they really love being pregnant. And then other ones, they just like love having a little one. Some of them love both of it. But like, how is it for you? Do you enjoy being pregnant?
I hate it.
Yeah.
I hate it with everything inside me. I thought that I would have 12 kids. That was my dream. Growing up, I wanted to have a million kids. And then I had Rudy, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have an only child, but I never want to do this again. And then we decided, let's just try again, have a second. And I'm in the midst of trying to convince my husband that we should just be done. So I love the little babies, and I love, oh my gosh, toddlers are so entertaining. They're so wildly insane.
Yeah.
But the pregnancy part is absolute garbage.
Yeah. So no more 10 after this, you don't think?
No.
Yeah. Cool. No, very
Unless
cool.
God decides to play a trick on us.
Sure.
Which, he has a sense of humor, so he might.
He does. He sabotages my plans all the time.
Yep.
So I hear you on that. Speaking of that, though, I want to hear your story. We've had a few people on who have had stories similar, but nothing quite like yours. So would you just take us through it however you want to tell it?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was actually a pastor for the first couple of years of my life. So I knew who Jesus was. I knew the Bible. I knew just everything like that classic being raised in a Christian family you would know. I knew what was right, what was wrong. And there was a lot of, being young, there's a lot of me that really enjoyed the church and enjoyed that community. But from a young age, kind of all of that got uprooted. And so the first thing that happened was my grandmother passed away. And I don't know if it was sudden to the rest of my family, but it was sudden to me. And that was really shocking because we had prayed for healing. That was the first tangible thing I remember happening, like that I was actively participating in my faith, like praying for my grandma to be healed, and that didn't happen. And a few months after that, my parents sat me and my siblings down and said, hey, we're getting separated. And I was 9 at the time. And I was really, really close with my dad. And so that was devastating. And I didn't know the details of why that was happening. I just knew my dad was moving out, and that was really difficult. And then a few months after that, I ended up being molested by basically a stranger. And so by the time I was 10, I came to the conclusion, like, everyone says God is good and that God is there with us, but I'm 10 years old and my life is ruined. And I didn't really have the language to tell my parents what happened. And my parents actually ended up staying married, which is a beautiful story of redemption in itself. But for me, I really didn't even recognize that until I was about 19. And so I was really struggling with abuse and the effects that abuse cause and just a lot of different things. So I decided when I get to be in high school or college age, then I would, leave the church and figure out what I was going to believe for myself. But until then, I would just kind of go for it. But by the time I was 14, I also realized that I was attracted to women. And so having been raised in a conservative, like a theologically conservative Christian family and community, I knew that wasn't really compatible with what I saw with the lifestyle of Christianity. So I had a few questions for myself, and it was kind of like I wasn't allowed to date anyways. So it wasn't really like, do I come out to my parents right now or what do I do? But it was just like, man, I don't really believe God is good. And now because of my attraction to women, I'm going to hell. Like that was just kind of my conclusion. And so I had a few friends who I grew up in a theater program, which is a super unique part of my upbringing that was Christian, but not everyone in there was a Christian. And so I had a lot of friends who were in the LGBTQ community that I kind of shared with. And I had some other close friends who were, I'd maybe say like more just open-minded and weren't really conservative. And so I had a few people who I told and kind of talked to and said, like, what was it like when you came out, or what do you think? And I had a lot of friends in that community that were like, we love you and whatever you do, we'll be here for you. And so I had this support in kind of outside of the faith community. And then within the faith community, the only conversation I ever heard was, like same-sex attraction is wrong and like homosexuality is wrong, and that was it. And so I just felt, I don't know if I felt a pull, but I felt like a tension between the two, because it was like, this is what I was raised with, and in theory God seems great, but it's not what I'm experiencing. And so I kind of kept walking through that. And I really didn't date a lot of boys. I dated a few friends, kind of in hopes to not necessarily cover stuff up, but just try and see, like, maybe I can make this work. I don't really know. While I continued to be in a youth group. And when I look back on it, I'm like, it doesn't make any sense that I went to this youth group, right? Like, I thought, what they were teaching about God was complete BS. I just didn't buy into it. But what I did buy into was this sense of community that I got there. And I remember there was two really formative things that happened while I was at that youth group. The first was my small group leader. Someone found my Tumblr and showed my small group leader. And my Tumblr was like, it's like this blog. And it was very obvious that I was same-sex attracted if you found this. And so that was like a confrontation that happened. And she shared with my youth pastor. And I was just mortified. Like, I was so ready to go to church and be asked to leave, or be told that I was wrong, or just all these things. And I remember my youth pastor just like pulling me aside and saying, hey, like, you're not alone. By the way, Brenna, you're not alone. A lot of Christians struggle with this. And I just want to let you know you're welcome here. And that's all he said. And it was this incredibly, like, I knew even if he was like, where we stand on this, I feel like I would have felt so displaced. But him just being so like, hey, I see you. I want you to know that I see you, was so formative in who I was beginning to meet, who the real person of Jesus is, if that makes sense. And so I really believe, because he said that, I continued to stay. And I want to say like a year after that, or maybe even not that long, they did a sermon series on difficult questions. And the first one of them was about his being gay sin. And the interesting thing that I found today is that the term gay means so many different things to so many different people. And so the guy who's preaching talked about how attraction and action are two different things, and how Jesus faced temptation, but Jesus didn't give in to temptation. And so he was like, we can be tempted towards something, we can have an attraction towards something, but because we have the Holy Spirit, we don't have to walk into that. And so that was the first time that I had ever heard, like, I always thought because I was same-sex attracted, I was damned to hell. And then all of a sudden for me, now it was like, wait a second, I can be attracted to women and hold that tension and still be obedient to what I believe the Bible calls Christians to. Not sure if that was right for me, but I was like, okay, I see how Christians could do this. And so I just kept walking in that like strange tension of trying to figure out, like, what the heck am I going to do? And not really feeling bought into the idea of who Jesus was yet. And just, I'm bipolar, so I struggle with mental illness, and I have since I was probably 13 in reality. And so my senior year, I just remember feeling like God gave me a break from that, from the depression and anxiety. And just kind of with that, because I had prayed for that, and with that going, okay, maybe if I can trust God with my mental health, I can also trust God with my relationships. Because I had also always viewed marriage as this like fulfillment, right? Like your soulmate and they complete you. And then you finally realizing, like, there's no one on this earth that can complete me. And that's not my spouse's job. And what a wild job to place on them in the first place. And realizing, like, if I believe in what Jesus says and I find someone else who believes in what Jesus says, like, our relationship should be compatible. So it was like, okay, I don't think not getting married and being alone maybe for the rest of my life is the end of the world. Like, I think if I'm going to trust God, I have to trust him with whether or not I'll get married or whatever that looks like. And so at about 17 or 18, I think I was 17, that's when I was like, okay, I am same sex attracted, but I'm not going to date women and I'm not going to identify with the LGBTQ community. And so that wasn't a public thing. Just a few friends knew. And my parents didn't even know. And then I think it was later, it was around when I got engaged to Austin, and he knew. We talked about it in our premarital and everything, that I started to feel this conviction that there's a lot of people who are like me. Because I think something that's really interesting about this is there's like a lot of straight people who are non-affirming, and like they have that community, and then there's a lot of same-sex attracted people who wouldn't even use that word because they're out and they're living that lifestyle in the LGBTQ plus community. But then there are a lot of people who are like me, who have that attraction, but who feel the conviction to not live that lifestyle. But I think there are a lot of people who feel like they're alone in that. And so I felt this conviction to start talking about it. So I shared with my parents. And then I remember I think the first group of people I shared with was a small group I was leading. And so from that, it's just kind of been this like this strange like coming out, or like this different type of coming out and sharing my story. But yeah, I mean, God obviously called me into a marriage, which has been so radically formative as well in who Jesus is and what marriage is about. But just this living this lifestyle, and I'm in the Pacific Northwest, that's very different than what people would expect or even what people want. It's been a wild ride. It's gotten me a good amount of attention on very negative platforms and some really beautiful platforms. And so it's something that I've had to learn how to retrust God just in that. Just in, God, do you want me to share my story right now, or do you want me to shut up? And so anyways, in as few words or as many words as I just used, that's why I'm here today. So
yeah, no, thank you for sharing that with us. It's always a peculiar thing trying to put your story into a nutshell,
yeah.
and give it to other people. But I really appreciate that. So what was the transition like for you between, so hearing that all of a sudden things started happening with mental health, and I was like, okay, maybe I can trust God. I'll try. And once you saw that there was actually something there, something was bearing fruit, then you're like, okay, I'll start trusting God with my sexuality as well. So to go from there, and then all of a sudden with Austin in premarital counseling, what was that? Are you able to share a little bit of that for people? Because it's we had someone named Lori Krieg on. She and her husband wrote this book called An Impossible Marriage, and she was gay. She had same-sex attraction. She was married, had 2 kids. Hers was different in that it was until after the second kid that she realized she had abuse when she was young, and that really wrecked stuff between her and her husband for a year or 2 afterwards. So I see Jesus calling his people in different ways to do what you've done, but it's always kind of a curious thing. It's like, like we like same-sex attraction, and then I met Austin, and then we got married. It's like, well, how did that happen? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I think for us, and I do want to acknowledge that that's not, I don't believe that God is calling gay people to be straight, right? Like I don't think he's requiring this, and I do think this is more a story of the minority of same-sex attracted people. But for me, I know God knew that I had a huge heart to have a family. Like I shared earlier, that I wanted 12 kids. Like I just always wanted to have a family, and I always wanted to have someone to do ministry with. And I think it was a change in my view of marriage that went, for me, it was like, okay, marriage isn't about, nor should it be centered on sexual attraction. I think that's part of it.
Mm.
And I've had people who go, well, how does that work? How do you have sex with your husband? To be like very blunt.
Mm.
And for me, it was a prayer that when I was dating Austin, like, with God, would you lead me to fall in love with him in these different ways that I feel like I can't as I fall in love with him as a person? And so I think it was just that Austin and I also got to know each other during a really, I keep using the word formative, but we started, I met him when I was young, but we started emailing when I was in Youth with a Mission, which is really interesting. And then so that was 6 months. And then I came home and I was home for 6 months and we hung out for 6 months. And then he left and he did YWAM for 6 months. And so we had this year and a half where we weren't even dating, where we were just getting to know each other. And I think at the end of that, when he was about to come home and I knew dating would be a huge possibility, I was like, okay, God, is this like, I want to do life with this person. Like, I don't know, I don't know how like all this other stuff plays into it or how it will work, but I just know that I love Austin so much, and why wouldn't I want to do the rest of life with him? Like, I trust him in all these different ways, and he would be an amazing dad and an amazing partner. And if this is what you want for us, then you have to lead us into that. And there's this weird, I went to a camp. I remember Austin had been home. It was right before he left for YWAM. And I had gone on a date with someone else, and that like super bummed him out. And because I had told him, I was like, I don't think I would need to date anyone right now, but I went on a date with someone else, and that was me being a little bit inhonest, but went on a date with someone else, super bummed him out.
Yeah.
And I went to this camp, and I remember every night of this camp, I was like, okay, Lord, I'm leading. But I know that if you want to do something for me, or you want to talk to me, you want to tell me something at this camp, like, I'm willing, because I don't want it to just be like, it's for the students. God, if you want to do something for me or tell me something, teach me something, whatever. And 3 nights in a row, like, I kept hearing Austin's name, and I was like, God, this is stupid, because if I text him, it's going to be like, my date didn't work out, like, I didn't want it to be like a quote unquote booty call. And I was like, this is so stupid. And the third night, I was like, man, whatever this is, God keeps putting Austin on my heart. I don't know why, but I just need to be obedient. So I texted Austin, and I was like, I'm so sorry that I was dishonest with, what I said about dating. And you are someone who I like really just want to be friends with. Like, I just really love knowing you, and I hate that I haven't gotten to see you. And he was like, that's so funny, because I was going to come to camp tomorrow, and then I knew you were there, so I decided not to come. So he ended up coming, and then so then that's how our friendship got back together. But that to me was very obviously God saying, like, no, I have something for you here.
Oh, I love that. And that makes me really happy. I do wonder how do you counsel other people who have same-sex attraction? So to fill this out a little bit, I didn't meet Jesus till I was 19, and my adolescence was ripe with pornography. And because of it, and maybe some other things, like, my sexuality has been binary. It's not just the opposite sex. When it comes to attraction, it's not ever something I've ever acted out, and it's just like an attraction that I know is there for some reason, that my imagination has a lot of bandwidth for that in both directions. And so I've really profited by people like Lori Craig and yourself, or like Wesley Hill, other people. And so I see different folk, whether it's, and I even have two people in my wedding who are celibate. They have same-sex attraction. They've chosen a life of celibacy, at least for now, unless Jesus tells them to do something else. So when it comes to people who, like, this is near and dear to my heart, that is to say, so when it comes to counseling other people, how do you do that, Brenna? Like, when it comes to helping other people follow Jesus, and they come to you and say, like, hey, this is, because our sexual identity has been made culturally such a huge part of our humanity, you know? And so meeting people in that place can be quite tumultuous. So how do you do it? What do you say? Give us the 3 points that you've distilled that'll fix everybody, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, there is no good prescriptive answer. And that's what I've learned with following Jesus, right? Like he's so kind and so good to meet us each specifically where we're at in our walk. And so I think the first thing that I try to do is just listen and listen to their story and say, okay, God, is there something that you want to highlight in what they're sharing? And then also, I think there's a huge thing specifically with same-sex attraction that I've seen in other areas, but I think it's huge with same-sex attraction that people who are non-affirming like myself are tempted to be the Holy Spirit and try to convict people. Because I have people in my life who are living in same-sex relationships and or who are saying like, I don't know where to land quite yet. You know, I can't convict someone of a lifestyle. I can't convict someone that something is or isn't sin. But I think, you know, and I say this in almost every single interview I'm in, but the way that I've seen Jesus interact with people in the New Testament, especially those who lived lifestyles contrary to or in contrasting to the Jewish religion, was that he said, hey, come spend time with me. Like we see that in Mark chapter 2. And I'm not going to outline it because I think if you're listening, you should go read it. But Jesus just inviting people to spend time with him. And through that, they were convicted to change, watching Jesus live his lifestyle. And so, you know, I try to have really open and honest conversations. So people will say, like, do you believe same-sex marriage is a sin? And I was like, yeah, I do. And sometimes people, that's enough for them to say, okay, I'm not interested in talking to you.
Yeah.
But I don't ever want my story to be about that. And I don't ever want counseling people to be about that. I want the focus to be on, hey, Jesus is ready to meet you where you're at, wherever that is. And how can I walk with you in a place that shows you that? Or how can I be an example of that? And I think a lot of that is just being honest with where I've been and how I've met Jesus, and also being honest with the pain that, you know, has been a part of this journey and a part of living a lifestyle that is contrasting what my flesh wants. So yeah, I guess those are the only 2 pointers I have. Listen and don't try to be the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. Well, your youth pastor from all those years ago has become one of my heroes just because he knew all that stuff and you were so scared to go to church. And he just pulled you aside and said, you are so welcome here. You know, like what a beautiful thing to give to you. And it, you know, freaked you out in all the right ways, you know, but that's the stuff that humbles the heart, you know, like really makes you take a step back. Like even if you leave, you say that was different. You know, you can't ever shake an experience like that. This is such a beautiful thing to give. And that's Jesus. I mean, Jesus's way is the way of hospitality. So I like all of that. So maybe, okay. So that's for people maybe who are struggling and just trying to figure out what it looks like to follow Jesus. When it comes to people who are heterosexual, I think those 2 points still apply. It's like this in approaching. But speaking to me directly, but also to the church corporately, like what do you think would be helpful and good when it came to approaching people who have same-sex attraction or just single folk in general? We tend to just ostracize single folk and somebody's not fully human until they're married, you know?
Yeah.
Which is an implicit teaching in the church in a lot of ways. But Kaylee and I, for instance, feel very called towards single folk and and some of my best friends have same-sex attraction, and trying to figure out how to love them well. What does it look like to be present to them? Because it's not, I'm finding that it's not so much that they're horny, but just that we're all lonely,
Yeah.
like a lot of us just want to be known, and we can treat them as unsafe for whatever reason because we don't understand their attraction. And so what does it look like to position ourselves in intentional ways to love well? Because just maybe going to church once a week and saying, hey, good to see you, you're that gay person, trying to like go out of your way to love them because you're supposed to, it really doesn't cut it. Like life is too hard and too lonely to just treat people that way. So when it comes to something you would say to heterosexual folk who want to learn how to love well people who have same-sex attraction?
Yeah, I think a language of inclusion is really important. And I feel like when I say that, some people are like, that's super PC. I'm not going to do that. But what I mean by that is, a lot of people just want to share or have the opportunity to share. And so I think about, okay, I love what my youth pastor did for me, but then I think about the conversations that I had in small group and when we had relationship talks. What would it have been like if the conversation was not, what boys are you guys interested in? But hey, like, how does attraction work for you? And like, what does that look like in your life? And because I think same-sex attraction is so often labeled as an outside of the church sin, like that people inside the church don't deal with it, which I think is really, I think people are starting to walk away from that idea now. But I do think it's really, I think it's a huge thing that the church misses, because I look at churches and I go, wow, it's so amazing that we have ministries inside of our church for people who have sexual addictions, for people who have had abortions, for people who have gotten divorced. But most churches don't have ministries for people who are same-sex attracted and who want to live a non-affirming lifestyle. And that's hard because identity, right? There's so many different things, and especially when the world is so loudly saying that your sexual identity is so, so important. I think Christians do a good job of saying, well, our most important identity or our most true thing about ourselves is that we are Christ's. But then, we have young marrieds group, and we have, we have all these other things that's like, man, we are so not seeing single people. Or like, it's classic when youth groups will have like the relationship panel. And they'll be like, this person is here to talk about singleness. And you're like, you're 19. Like, of course you're single, instead of having someone who's like vocationally single, who's 40, who's served the Lord well through their singleness and can offer a lot. I think there's just a lot from what I'd call like a leadership position of church, or like even from the platform of church, that we can do to love same-sex attracted and single people well that we haven't done actively yet. And then I think if you're just a lay person within the church, and you're heterosexual, how can you love same-sex attracted people well? I think is that acknowledgement. I did an interview with people about a pastor and his wife about sexuality. And they were talking about the importance of communication and just how, like, it's okay to say to someone, man, I really wish I could have held someone's hand today. Or I really wish I could have sat close to someone today. Or I really wish I could have had like this non-romantic intimacy with someone today. I think that's something we don't often invite, or like we don't know how to talk about. But just this invitation of that church is really supposed to be a family, and that Christian community is supposed to be a family. And so seeing people well and being like, hey, this person's single, so let's invite them over for the holidays, or let's make sure they feel welcome, or let's, instead of doing a double date, let's do that. Just there's so many basic things that I think we can do. And I'm a huge fan of just being blunt and just asking. I think it's scary, but for me, so I'm an Enneagram 4. So if someone were to be like, "Are you comfortable talking about your journey with sexuality?" I'd be like, "Yes." I'd feel so loved if someone wanted to ask me questions about that. And I think there are a lot of people who feel the same way. Or there's a lot of things that we can pick up on from those conversations, and just being able to recognize, especially same-sex attracted people who decide to live a celibate lifestyle. I think it's very honoring to them to say, like, "Hey, this seems like a really difficult choice. How can I care for you well and love you well through this?" And just being willing to listen.
I appreciate all of that, Brenna. Brenna, one of the last things I want to ask is, I'm always interested in maybe what's the message that you feel like Jesus has given you? What is something that's been poured into your heart and motivates a lot of what you do? Whether it's something you want to see, or something that's bitten down and you just can't shake, or a reality about God, whatever it might be. Would love to hear just what you love, what you long for, what drives the ministry that you do.
I think so often in the conservative Christian community, and I would say we also see this in the progressive Christian community, we feel a need to only present our side of the story, or to not ask unsafe questions because we're afraid, right? We're afraid. We don't want our kids to learn about sexuality from public schools. We don't want, there's just long lists of these things. And for me, I got to know who the real God was through my unsafe questions. And I think if we're going to be a people who believe that God is truth and God has truth, we have to be willing to engage with difficult questions and difficult subjects. And so my passion is that our hard questions would be welcome in the church, would be welcome in Christian community, and be things that we're willing to be honest about how they've led us to God. Because I have to be honest, like, my most difficult questions and my most difficult situations in life are the ones that led me quite literally to Jesus.
Yeah.
And I just think of how many students I've worked with that have said, this is my biggest secret, or this is my biggest shame, and I can't talk about it with anyone else. And I'm going, no. Like, God longs for you to bring this into the light. God longs for you to bring this to him. And you're not alone in this. Like, I want people, I want to be able to say what my youth pastor said to me. And I think now, having experienced God through mental illness, through sexuality, and through abuse, that I can say, yeah, like, I'm not alone in any of those things. And I don't want anyone else to ever feel like they're alone, because that's not the truth. Like, God is in those spaces. And so I think that's it.
I love all of that. I think one of the most humbling things of learning through all the years of seminary was realizing that Jesus's primary teaching method was asking questions. Like, the one thing he did more than anything else was ask questions, which is even more humbling, thinking that he already knew the answers, but he wanted to hear them talk. He wanted to hear them say it. And he was just so present to people and let them ask him really hard questions. It was really beautiful. I remember hearing that the single greatest utterance of Jesus, the one thing he said more than he said anything else, is, "What do you want?" What do you want? It's such a beautiful question. Brenna, thank you so much for being with us today. It has been really I feel very honored to be with you and to hear from you. We always end with two questions. One is, how can people track with you? And how can we be praying for you? And it is worth saying that I really love your podcast. So please do mention that. You ask really hard, blunt questions. I like listening. I'm like, she did it. She asked that question, And I'm like, I'm not nearly that brave. But you even had Joshua Harris on like last year, which was amazing. I don't know how you got him on, but when it comes to purity culture and conversations about progressive Christianity, I've really valued them, and they are bite-sized. You keep them to about half an hour and really love them. So tell us about that, and tell us how we can be praying for you.
Yeah, so my podcast is Can I Say That? And you can find us on Instagram at Can I Say That Show. And on our Instagram, we share about who our guest is going to be and what our topics are going to be. So that's kind of a little inside behind the scenes scoop. And then my Instagram is at Bun on My Head. And you can get all my speaking updates. I do a lot of interaction on my personal page that kind of leads back to the questions that we ask on the podcast. And so there's all that. And man, you can pray for me. It is, I think everyone knows it's a really difficult time to be a Christian, but it's a really difficult time to be a Christian who's same-sex attracted, who's not affirming. There's a lot of pain that people in the LGBTQ community are feeling from Christians, which is really burdensome. And then there's also a lot of just animosity between non-affirming and affirming Christians, and that's really, really difficult. And my family is growing, and we're super excited about that. And we feel this pull to have more conversations like this with more people. And so as that happens, I'm finding that I'm in front of more people than I ever thought I would be, which is amazing and a blessing. It's also really, really difficult. So you can pray for me that that we are protected and that, I struggle with being kind. And so to have these kind of conversations on the internet and then have some really difficult conversations with people over the internet can be really difficult, and I don't want to be a jerk. So you can pray for my heart that I'm not a jerk.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I hope it's encouraging, because I think it's worth saying that I've learned more about marriage from you and Lori than I ever have from anyone else when it comes to what does oneness actually mean and look like. What does it mean to have a real friendship with your spouse? Those sorts of things have been illuminated by women who have same-sex attraction, and I never thought I'd learn so much from I didn't know I could learn so much. And I've just been so edified, and even in my singleness, about other men and women who are same-sex attracted but celibate, and because you guys are actually having to dig for answers in ways that are more assumed. There's a cultural script for us who follow have it easier in that sense. It's not something we actually have to wrestle through at all, so we have a script that we can live out. But the real answers are underneath the script. The Jesus way is underneath that script. And to see you guys excavate some of it for us has been really life-giving to me and my marriage, and I know to the communities around me. So thank you for what you're doing. I know that doesn't help, but it does at least give some perspective, I think, that people are being edified by you and that Jesus is doing real work through your story and what you're excavating.
Well, that's really, really kind and encouraging to hear. So thank you.
Right on. Brenna, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Folks, thank you for being with us. Brenna's story it's unique to her, yet it's a story that so many other people have. And all of it, not just the same-sex attraction, but abuse and the mental health stuff. So many of you all have experienced that. So thank you for tracking with us. I hope Brenna's story has it's helped. I think it's all helped us see Jesus a little bit better. And I'm just so very grateful for that. Please share your thoughts with us. We would love to hear. If you have directions that you want us to go, please let us know. All of Brenna's stuff will be down below in the show notes, so do check that out. And we will catch you all next time on The Naked Gospel.